So let's talk about something that's incredibly difficult and, honestly, deeply emotional: motor accident compensation. For a long time in India, the process was all over the place. But then the Supreme Court stepped in to bring some real clarity and order to it all. They created a single standardized system to answer one very tough question. And that question is, how do you put a value on a life lost in an accident? I mean, it feels impossible, right? It's something families and courts have struggled with forever. But the thing is, the legal system has to have an answer. So, how exactly do they do it? Let's find out. All right, let's get into it. The answer, believe it or not, comes from a single landmark Supreme Court ruling. This is what created the whole standardized legal framework we have today. And the goal? It was pretty simple, really. Bring fairness and consistency to every single case, no matter where in the country it took place. You see, before this ruling, things were, well, kind of chaotic. The situation was totally unpredictable. The amount of compensation you might get could be wildly different from one court to another. Just imagine that. It just added so much more uncertainty for families who are already dealing with an incredible loss. So the Supreme Court knew they had to fix this. They wanted a system that was uniform, that was fair, and that delivered what the law calls just compensation. And this is the key takeaway here. The whole point was to get rid of all the guesswork. No more subjective calls that really plagued the old process. And the solution? It all came down to one specific case: Pranay Sethi versus the National Insurance Company. This is the big one. This ruling is what laid down the hard and fast rules and principles that every single tribunal in the country has to follow today. Okay, so how'd they do it? They created a core method for the calculation, so let's actually break down how this formula works, step by step. Okay, at the very heart of this system is something called the multiplier method. It's not optional, it's a mandatory formula. And here is the really crucial detail you have to get. The multiplier is based on the age of the deceased, the person who passed away, not on the age of the family members who are making the claim. That's a huge distinction. So why is that so important? Well, because it creates a clear, consistent starting point for every single case. It means that two very similar cases, even if they're in totally different parts of the country, are going to start with the exact same basic math. It just levels the playing field for everybody involved. But, the calculation doesn't just stop there. The law is smart enough to know that a person's income doesn't just stay flat. It's probably going to go up over time. So the very next step is to figure out how to account for that lost future potential. And this idea is called future prospects. It's basically a standardized percentage that gets added to the person's last known income. It's actually a really fascinating way for the law to try and make the compensation more realistic, right? It's not just looking at a snapshot in time, but at what could have been. Now, this is where it gets a little more detailed. The calculation is different depending on someone's job. If you had a permanent job, there's a clear percentage that gets added. But if you were self-employed or had a fixed salary, the court can't just, pick a number out of thin air. Any increase has to be totally justified by evidence and solid legal principles. Okay, let's actually look at how this works with a real example. Let's say we're talking about a 35-year-old with a permanent job. Since they're under 40, boom, a full 50% is added to their income for the calculation. Now, if they were, say, 45, it would be 30%. And as you can see here, once someone is over 50, the law pretty much assumes their income has stabilized, so nothing extra gets added. All right, so that's how future potential gets added in. But the formula also has to account for deductions. So after they've added that future income, the court makes one very important deduction. And that's the deduction for personal expenses. The logic here is really simple when you think about it. Part of anyone's income is spent on themselves, right? Food, clothes, just personal stuff. Since that money wouldn't have gone to the family anyway, it gets deducted from the total. And just like everything else, the standard for this is super clear. If the person was a bachelor, half of their income is considered personal expenses and gets deducted. But let's go back to our 35-year-old who was married with 2 kids. That's 3 dependents. In that case, only a third is deducted. So the more dependents, the smaller the deduction, which makes total sense when you think about family finances. So, okay, we've got the additions, we've got the deductions, but this whole formula isn't just about crunching numbers. It's actually built on a single really powerful legal idea that guides every single decision. And what is that guiding principle? It's the concept of just compensation. The whole framework, all the tables, all the percentages, it's all designed to do one thing: land on a number that is fair, that's reasonable, and that's, well, just in the eyes of the law.
Now, to make sure this happens, the courts have some very clear instructions. They have to ensure consistency and totally avoid any kind of guesswork. And I love this last part. The compensation can't be a bonanza, like a lottery win, but it also can't be a pittance. It has to hit that sweet spot of being a reasonable, just amount.
There's this quote from the ruling that just perfectly sums up the whole idea. It says, "Just compensation is not perfect compensation, but compensation based on settled legal standards." I mean, the law itself is admitting that no amount of money can ever replace a life. But what it can do is provide fair compensation based on clear standards that are the same for everybody.
So what's the bottom line here? This system takes what was a totally unpredictable process and makes it predictable. For families going through something just unimaginable, it provides a little bit of certainty. It ensures that the compensation they get is based on a nationwide standard of fairness, not just random chance.
Look, there's no doubt this framework is a huge step forward for legal consistency. But it does leave us with one last big question to think about. While these rules create a really important standard for fairness, can one single formula ever truly account for the unique value and the specific circumstances of every single individual life? That's a really deep question, sitting right where the law meets human loss.